I used to believe fate had simply forgotten to give us a child. That belief cost me 12 years before I learned it wasn't fate at all. It was my wife. I need to start further back than that hospital room, because you won't understand how completely I trusted her unless you understand what I'd already lost by the time she came into my life. My parents died when I was 26. A small plane, a business trip to a supplier upstate, whether that shouldn't have grounded anyone but somehow grounded them permanently. I inherited the company 2 years later, once the estate finished untangling itself through lawyers and probate courts, and a grief I hadn't finished feeling by the time I was expected to start signing things. I didn't want it. I want to be honest about that from the beginning. I didn't want the factory, the payroll, the quarterly meetings with men twice my age who called me son in a way that felt more like a leash than affection. I wanted my mother's voice reading in the next room. I wanted my father's hand steadying mine on a fishing rod. What I got instead was a company and a title, and an emptiness shaped exactly like a family I no longer had. I threw myself into the work because it was the only thing large enough to stand in front of the grief. 18-hour days, weekends at the plant. I told myself I was honoring them. Looking back, I think I was mostly just running, the way people run when stopping means facing an empty house. I met Alina 2 years into that. She worked in accounting, 3 floors below my office, in a department I visited maybe twice a year before then. I'd come down about a discrepancy in a supplier invoice. Small, forgettable, the kind of thing that should never have changed the direction of a life. And she was the one who found it, calmly, methodically, without the nervous over-explanation most people gave me once they learned whose name was on the building. She had a way of looking at you like she'd already decided you were a person and not a position. I hadn't realized how much I missed being looked at that way until she did it. We didn't rush anything. I want that understood, because everything that came after makes it tempting to imagine some elaborate seduction from day one. A woman playing a long con from the moment she saw my last name on a company badge. That's not what it felt like. It felt like 2 lonely people finding each other slowly, over lunches that got longer, over a shared umbrella during a rainstorm neither of us had planned for, over the particular ease of a conversation that didn't require performing anything. I proposed 18 months later at the lake house my parents used to rent every summer before they died, a place I hadn't been back to since the funeral. Taking her there felt like handing her something precious and asking her to hold it carefully. She cried when I asked. I remember thinking, with the kind of certainty you only get to feel once or twice in a life, that I had found my family again. Her family welcomed me with what I can only describe now as suspicious enthusiasm, though at the time I read it as simple warmth. Her mother, Carol, hosted elaborate dinners and asked pointed questions about the company's future with the eager curiosity I assumed was just pride in her new son-in-law. Her sister, Renee, was quieter, younger, prone to disappearing early from family gatherings with an excuse that never quite landed. I didn't think much of it. Every family has an odd one out. We married in a small ceremony. Alina wore her grandmother's dress. I stood at the altar thinking about my parents, wishing they could see this, wondering if some part of them could. The wanting children part started simply enough. We were both in our early 30s, financially stable, and it felt like the obvious next chapter in a story that had been, up to that point, remarkably straightforward. We stopped being careful. We waited for something to happen the way you wait for spring, patiently at first and then less so. A year passed, then another. We started seeing doctors somewhere around year 3, first casually, a general checkup, some blood work, then with the mounting seriousness of people who have started to suspect the universe owes them an explanation it isn't providing. Fertility specialists, hormone panel. An entire year of charts and temperatures and appointments scheduled around ovulation windows that never quite paid off. Every test came back frustratingly, maddeningly normal. My numbers were fine, hers were fine. One doctor, a kind older woman with silver hair and a gentle bedside manner, told us that sometimes there simply wasn't an answer, that unexplained infertility was its own diagnosis, its own particular cruelty, not broken, just unlucky. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Alina cried after every appointment that came back empty, real tears, the kind you can't fake convincingly for 12 years. And I held her through every single one of them, telling her it would happen when it was supposed to happen, telling her fate had its own timeline, telling her both of us lies I didn't know at the time were also, somehow, lies she was living inside of far more completely than I was. We talked about adoption, We talked about IVF. Every conversation ended the same way, Alina gently, always gently, steering us back toward waiting a little longer. "Let's give it one more year," she'd say. "I don't want to give up on us happening naturally." I thought it was hope. I thought it was love, refusing to let go of the version of our family she'd imagined since she was a girl. I think now that it was something closer to management. A woman carefully pacing a lie so it never had to face daylight. By year 10, we'd mostly made peace with it, or told ourselves we had, the particular peace of two people who have stopped fighting a current and let it carry them somewhere unplanned. We built a life around the absence instead of around the child we didn't have. Travel. A dog, a golden retriever named Baxter who Alina spoiled shamelessly. Sunday dinners with her parents that I still, even now, remember mostly fondly, which tells you something about how good the performance was, or how much I wanted to believe in it. Then Renee got pregnant. Nobody in the family seemed to know who the father was, or if they knew, nobody told me. Renee had always been private in a way that read, at the time, as simple shyness. She was 24, unmarried, working some administrative job I never fully understood, living 40 minutes away in an apartment none of us had ever visited. When Carol announced it at a Sunday dinner, flatly, almost clinically, like weather, the table went quiet in a way I registered as shock and, looking back, might have actually been rehearsal. "She's not going to say who," Carol said, cutting into her chicken like the conversation was already over. "And she's asked that we not push her on it." I didn't push. It wasn't my business, or so I thought at the time. I remember feeling, privately, a small, unwelcome ache. The ache of a man watching someone else's fertility work exactly the way his own never had. 12 years of trying reduced to nothing beside one unplanned pregnancy in someone who hadn't been trying at all. Alina was strange about it, in a way I didn't examine closely enough. Distracted during the pregnancy. Short with Renee on the phone in ways that didn't match their usual closeness. I told myself it was complicated feelings about her own struggles reflected back at her through her sister's body. I told myself a lot of things that year that turned out to have much simpler explanations than the generous ones I kept reaching for. Renee gave birth in the spring. A boy, 7 pounds 4 ounces, healthy by every account. 6 weeks later she was gone. I don't mean she disappeared into thin air. I mean she packed a bag, told her parents she couldn't do this, and left the baby with Carol and her husband, saying she needed time, saying she'd be back for him once she figured her life out, saying all the things a young, overwhelmed mother says when everyone around her is nodding sympathetically and privately relieved. I remember the phone call from Carol like it happened yesterday, her voice thin and worried in a way that at the time moved me. "We're too old for this," she said. "Your father-in-law's heart isn't what it used to be. We don't know what to do." I looked at Alina across the kitchen while I was still holding the phone. She was watching me with an expression I read then as grief, as longing, as a woman looking at a door that had just cracked open after 12 years of it staying shut. I said the words before I'd even fully thought them through. "We could take him." I wish I could tell you I remember hesitation on her face. Some flicker of guilt, some warning sign I simply failed to catch. I don't remember one. I remember her crossing the kitchen and putting her arms around me and crying into my shoulder, and I remember thinking, with a relief so total it embarrasses me now, that we had finally been given our chance. We named him Caleb at Alina's suggestion. Her grandfather's name, she said, and I thought nothing of the sentimentality, thought only that she was folding this child into her family the way any mother would. The paperwork moved quickly, almost suspiciously quickly in hindsight. Guardianship arranged through a family lawyer Carol recommended. A man named Priest who I now understand was on the family's payroll in ways that went well beyond a single case. At the time, I only registered gratitude. Everything felt like it was finally, mercifully going right. The first year was hard the way all new parenthood is hard, sleepless, disorienting, both of us stumbling through a role neither of us had trained for. But it was also, unmistakably, the happiest either of us had been in over a decade. I remember rocking Caleb at 3 in the morning, exhausted in a way that felt like a gift rather than a burden, thinking about my own father, wishing he could see me finally becoming one myself. Alina was, by every visible measure, a devoted mother. She read him bedtime stories in a voice that made even me, a grown man standing in the doorway, want to fall asleep to it. She learned his cries the way you learn a language, could tell hunger from tiredness from the particular whine that meant he wanted to be held facing outward so he could watch the room. I watched her love him and never once doubted it was real. That's the part that still unsettles me most, even now. I don't think her love for Caleb was ever the lie. I think that was the one true thing sitting in the middle of everything false. The years that followed felt, from the inside, like the family I'd been grieving since I was 26 finally reassembling itself. Caleb's first steps in the backyard, Baxter barking encouragement beside him. His first day of kindergarten, Alina crying at the bus stop in a way I mistook entirely for ordinary maternal sentiment. Birthdays with too many balloons. A camping trip when he was 7 where he caught his first fish and held it up like a trophy. And I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the exact shape of what I'd lost when my parents died, finally, impossibly, filled back in. Christmases were the best of it. Alina went overboard every year more each year, actually, wrapping presents with a care that bordered on ceremony. Insisting on the same tradition, cinnamon rolls Christmas morning, a specific order to opening gifts. Caleb's stocking always hung slightly higher than ours, because he's the reason for the season, she'd say, laughing, and I laughed too, never once wondering why a woman who'd fought so hard for a biological child of her own seemed, if anything, more devoted to this one than I sometimes even was. I built him a treehouse the summer he turned 9, the two of us working weekends with a set of plans I found online, both of us covered in sawdust. Both of us proud in the particular quiet way men are proud of things they've built with their hands. I taught him to fish the way my father taught me. I sat through school plays and soccer games and one deeply enthusiastic, deeply off-key piano recital, and every single time, without exception, I thought, this is what I was missing. This is what those 12 empty years were preparing me for. I never once in all that time thought to ask why they'd been empty at all. We took a family trip to the coast the summer Caleb turned 12. A rental house near the water, 2 weeks planned around nothing more complicated than sand and sunburn, and the particular lazy joy of a family with nowhere urgent to be. Alina packed for it with more anxious energy than usual, I remember now, double-checking a bag of prescriptions she kept zipped into a separate pocket of her suitcase, snapping at me, uncharacteristically, when I offered to help her pack it. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Why would I have? 12 years of trust doesn't announce its ending. It just walks you calmly toward the cliff and lets you keep smiling the whole way there. We were 3 days into the trip. Caleb was out on the porch building something elaborate out of driftwood. I was inside making lunch, half listening to Alina on the phone with her mother in the next room, her voice pitched low in the particular register people use when they think a wall is thick enough to keep a conversation private. Then I heard something hit the floor. I found her collapsed on the bedroom carpet, her phone still lit beside her hand, her face gone the pale, waxy color that makes your whole body understand an emergency before your mind catches up to it. I don't remember calling the ambulance. I remember Caleb's voice, high and frightened, asking what was wrong with Mom. I remember the drive to the hospital feeling both instant and endless, the way trauma bends time in directions it has no business bending. I remember sitting in a plastic chair in a too bright hallway, waiting, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to seriously since my parents' funeral, promising anything, everything if she would just be okay. I had no idea that the woman I was praying for had spent 12 years quietly, methodically, making sure I never got the one thing I'd wanted most. I had no idea that the truth was already sitting in a lab 3 floors above me, waiting for a doctor with the wrong amount of caution to open his mouth and ask a question that would end my marriage before I even understood what he was asking. The doctor who came to find me had the careful, rehearsed calm of a man who delivers difficult news for a living and has never fully gotten used to it. He introduced himself as Dr. Ashworth, sat across from me in a small consultation room that smelled like hand sanitizer and old coffee, and told me Alina was stable. Dehydration, exhaustion, a mild electrolyte imbalance, nothing life-threatening, nothing that wouldn't resolve with fluids and rest. I remember the specific relief of that sentence, how it moved through my whole body like something physical. Then he hesitated, just slightly. The kind of pause you'd miss if you weren't a man who'd spent his whole adult life reading the small hesitations of people about to deliver bad news in board meetings. "I'm sorry," he said, glancing down at a chart. "I have to ask, you two have been trying to conceive for a long time, is that right?" 12 years, I said, on and off, more on than off. "That's what I thought." He turned the chart slightly, not quite showing it to me, the gesture of a man deciding how much he was allowed to say. "Then I have to ask, has your wife mentioned being on hormonal birth control? Her blood work shows levels consistent with long-term, high-dose contraceptive use. It's not something that shows up by accident." I remember the room going very quiet, in the specific way rooms go quiet when your own pulse becomes the loudest thing in them. "No," I said, "she hasn't. We've been trying for a baby for 12 years. "Doctor," Ashworth's expression did something complicated. Professional caution fighting visibly with simple human discomfort at what he'd just accidentally detonated in a stranger's life. "I could be misreading something," he said in the tone of a man who knew he wasn't. "I'd recommend asking her directly. I shouldn't have. I assumed it was something you both knew about. I'm sorry." I sat in that little room for a long time after he left, long enough that a nurse eventually knocked to ask if I was all right. I told her I wasn't. When I finally went in to see Alina, she was sitting up in the hospital bed, pale but alert, Caleb already curled in the chair beside her, asleep from the exhaustion of the day. I remember looking at her face, the same face I'd looked at across 1,000 ordinary breakfasts, and feeling, for the first time in our marriage, like I was looking at someone I didn't fully recognize. "The doctor said something strange," I said quietly so I wouldn't wake Caleb, "about your blood work." I watched it happen. I watched the lie arrive on her face before she'd even decided what shape it would take, a small tightening around her eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there a second before. "I don't know what he's talking about," she said. "Doctors get things wrong all the time." He seemed pretty sure. "Then he's wrong." Her voice had an edge to it I'd rarely heard directed at me in 15 years. "I'm exhausted and I almost passed out in front of our son, and you want to interrogate me about a lab mix-up." I let it go. That night I told myself I'd let it go because she was recovering, because it wasn't the time, because 15 years of trust doesn't unravel over one uncomfortable sentence from a tired doctor. I know now that I let it go because some part of me was already afraid of what pulling that thread would cost me. And for one more night, I wanted to keep believing in the family I still, at that point, thought I had. I didn't let it go for long. 2 weeks after we got home, I drove to the pharmacy we'd used for over a decade, told the pharmacist I needed a full record of prescriptions for insurance purposes, a request routine enough that nobody questioned it. I sat in my car in the parking lot with the printout in my lap for a long time before I made myself read it. 12 years. A hormonal contraceptive, refilled with quiet, unbroken consistency month after month, under a name I recognized because it was my wife's, filled at a pharmacy across town from our house. Not the one near our home where we usually filled things, not the one where anyone might recognize her and mention it to me by accident. I sat there and did the math I didn't want to do, every fertility appointment, every hormone panel, every tearful night where I'd held her and promised her fate had a plan. All of it staged over a foundation that had never once given us a real chance. I want to tell you my first feeling was rage. It wasn't, not yet. It was something quieter and worse. A kind of vertigo, the sensation of a floor you'd trusted your whole weight to suddenly revealing it had never actually been solid. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I told myself I needed to understand the shape of it fully before I said anything, because some instinct, cold and unfamiliar to me, was already telling me this wasn't a small betrayal I could resolve over one difficult conversation. This was something larger, something with architecture, and I needed to see the whole structure before I started pulling at any one wall. I hired a private investigator. A woman named Denise Acaffer, recommended quietly by a friend from the company board who'd used her during a supplier fraud case years before. I told her when we first met that I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to know. It took her 3 weeks to bring me the first piece that changed everything. "Your sister-in-law," she said, sliding a folder across the table of the small office she worked out of, never actually disappeared. I remember staring at her, waiting for the rest of the sentence to make sense. She lives 40 minutes from here, Denise said. Married a man named Thomas Reyes 6 years ago. They have a house near the Lake District. She works part-time as a paralegal. She let that settle before adding more carefully, she's also been having lunch with your mother-in-law almost every week for the past decade. Regularly, consistently. The kind of pattern you don't get from a family that lost touch. I felt something cold settle into my chest. The specific, nauseating cold of understanding that a story you've believed for years was constructed, deliberately, by people who watched you believe it. She was never gone, I said, mostly to myself. She was kept away from Caleb, Denise said. Specifically from Caleb. From what I can tell, she's seen every other member of your wife's family regularly since the day she left him with you. Just not him. Over the following month, Denise brought me pieces the way you'd bring someone a body, one part at a time, each one confirming a shape I still didn't want to see completed. Old text messages, recovered from a cloud backup Alina had apparently forgotten still existed, tied to a phone she'd replaced years earlier. Conversations between Alina and her mother, dated back to before Caleb was even born, references to the plan, to keeping things clean, to timelines discussed with the flat, procedural language of people planning a merger rather than a family. Financial documents. An estate attorney, not priest, a different one Carol had consulted privately years before Renee ever got pregnant, outlining scenarios for family continuity. In the event the protagonist's marriage produced no biological heir. I read that document 3 times in a parking lot in the middle of the day, feeling something in my chest go very still and very cold. An email 4 years old from Carol to Alina that I made Denise read aloud to me because I couldn't make my own eyes finish the sentence. If he never has children of his own, everything eventually needs somewhere to go. Better it goes somewhere we can still reach. I sat with that sentence longer than I sat with almost anything else in this entire story. Somewhere we can still reach. Not somewhere loved, not somewhere safe. Somewhere reachable, like an account, like a piece of property left conveniently unlocked. I kept working, kept showing up at the company, kept sitting across from Alina at dinner and asking Caleb about his day and tucking him in and kissing my wife goodnight. All while a folder in my home office safe grew thicker with the architecture of my own unraveling. I don't know how I managed it. I think some part of me needed the ordinary rituals to stay intact a little longer, needed one more month of pretending, before I had to become a man who knew what I knew. Denise's final piece came on a Thursday. She called and asked if I could come in person rather than talk on the phone, which told me, before I even sat down across from her, that whatever she had was the kind of thing you didn't deliver over a phone line. I got a recording, she said, through a contact who's been quietly working the mother-in-law's side of this for me. A conversation between Carol and Renee about 6 months ago. I need you to understand this isn't admissible in court the way it was obtained, but I think you need to hear it anyway. She played it. The audio was rough, distant, the sound of 2 women talking in what might have been a kitchen, dishes clinking somewhere in the background. I recognized Carol's voice immediately, that same brisk, managing tone I'd mistaken for warmth at 100 family dinners. He still has no idea, she said, and I heard, unmistakably, something like satisfaction in it. 12 years and he still thinks it just didn't happen for them. He's a good man, I'll give him that. Good enough to raise that boy like his own without ever once asking the wrong question. Renee's voice quieter, harder to make out. Something about it feeling wrong, something I couldn't fully catch. It's not wrong, Carol said, sharper now. It's smart. He never realized he was raising our future heir. That boy will inherit everything that man built, and it will still be ours. That's not cruelty, Renee. That's just making sure the family survives. The recording ended there. Denise turned off the player and didn't say anything for a moment, giving me the kind of silence you give someone who's just been handed the exact shape of the thing they'd spent months afraid of. I sat in that office for a long time. I thought about Caleb's face the day he caught his first fish. I thought about Alina crying at his kindergarten bus stop, tears I now understood might have been real for entirely different reasons than I'd assumed, grief, maybe, or guilt, or the particular exhaustion of loving a child inside a lie she'd helped build. I thought about my own parents, gone before I was 30, and how desperately I had wanted after them to build something that couldn't be taken from me. I hadn't understood until that recording that it already had been, quietly, patiently, for 12 years. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway for almost an hour before I went inside, watching the lit windows of a house I now understood I had never fully lived in. Not as an equal, not as a husband, as an asset, being managed carefully by people who had learned exactly which strings to leave untouched and which ones to pull. When I finally walked through the door, Alina looked up from the couch and smiled at me, the same smile she'd given me for 15 years. And I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its coldness, that the next conversation I had with this family would be the last one conducted on their terms. /BR. I didn't confront Alina that night. I waited until Caleb was at a sleepover, a birthday party for a classmate, safely out of the house for the evening. I didn't want him anywhere near what I knew was coming. I laid the folder on the kitchen table between us. Pharmacy records, the estate document, printed transcripts of the recording, though I didn't tell her yet where they'd come from. I watched her eyes move over the first page, watched her go very still, watched 15 years of careful performance finally run out of road. 12 years, I said. I want to hear you say it, not deny it, not manage it, just say it. She didn't cry right away, which surprised me. She sat very straight, her hands flat on the table, and when she finally spoke, her voice had none of the practiced warmth I'd built a marriage around. I loved you, she said. That part was never a lie. I need you to know that before anything else. That's not what I asked. I know, she closed her eyes. Yes, I took birth control for 12 years. My mother arranged it before we even got engaged, had a doctor she trusted quietly prescribe it, told me it was just in case, told me we'd figure out the real plan once we saw how serious things got with you. And then things got serious, and I didn't know how to stop. And every year that passed made it harder to imagine telling you, because what was I supposed to say? That I'd let you believe your body had failed you for a decade because my family didn't want your blood mixed with mine. You could have said no, I said. At any point in 12 years, you could have said no. I know. Her voice cracked finally on the second word. I told myself I was protecting the family. Then I told myself I was protecting you from a mess you didn't ask for. Then Caleb came, and I told myself none of it mattered anymore because I loved him the way I would have loved my own child, and maybe that could be enough to make up for the rest of it. It doesn't, I said. It never was going to. I called Renee the next day. I don't know exactly what I expected. Defensiveness, maybe, or the same practiced deflection Alina had offered before finally cracking. What I got instead was a woman who sounded, from the first word, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was almost relieved to finally set it down. I was going to come back for him, she said, her voice thin over the phone. That was always the plan in my head. Once I had money of my own, once I didn't need my parents for anything anymore, I was going to tell him the truth and ask if he wanted to know me. I know how that sounds now. I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I never stopped thinking about him. Not one day. Your mother said it was smart, I said. Not cruel, just smart. There was a long silence on the line. My mother, Renee said finally, has never once in her life called something cruel if it worked. I met with Carol exactly once more in a lawyer's office flanked by attorneys on both sides, the kind of room specifically designed to keep emotion contained within professional furniture. She showed no remorse. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier, cleaner, if I could tell you she broke down the way Alina had, the way Renee had over the phone. She didn't. You had a good life, she said when I asked her directly if she regretted any of it. A wife who loved you, a son who adores you. What exactly did we take from you? 12 years, I said, and the right to know what my own life actually was. She didn't have an answer for that. I don't think she believed she owed me one. The divorce moved quickly once the facts were established. The prenuptial agreement, drafted by a company attorney years before Alina and I married, back when I was still cautious in ways I'd later softened out of trust, protected the company entirely. Alina left with her personal belongings and very little else, which her lawyer fought over half-heartedly, the fight of people who already know the ground they're standing on has given out beneath them. The story became local news before I wanted it to. A reporter for the business section picked up the lawsuit filing, and from there, it moved the way these things move now, faster and louder than I had any control over. I hadn't wanted publicity. I'd wanted, if anything, to handle it quietly for Caleb's sake more than my own. But the company's board came out publicly in my support within days, and the community followed close behind. And somewhere in that noise, Carol's family became, very quickly, the kind of people other people crossed the street to avoid discussing. They sold their house within the year. I heard, secondhand, that they moved out of state to somewhere quieter, somewhere their name didn't arrive in a room before they did. None of that gave me the satisfaction I might have expected years earlier if you'd told me this story would end with my in-laws run out of town in disgrace. What I felt instead, mostly, was tired. Tired in the specific way you're tired after carrying something heavy for exactly as long as you need to, and finally getting to set it down. Caleb learned the truth the way children learn hard things now, gradually, in pieces, with adults trying their best to control a rollout that mostly controlled itself. He heard things at school first, before I could sit him down properly, some classmate's parent talking too loudly at a pickup line. He came home that day and asked me directly in the flat, too careful voice of a 12-year-old trying not to cry in front of his father, whether it was true that his mom, his real mom, had been alive the whole time. I didn't lie to him. I'd promised myself, somewhere in the middle of all of it, that whatever else got broken in this, I wasn't going to break that. Yes, I said, she's been alive, she's been close by actually. I only found out recently too. He was quiet for a long time after that. Days, really, moving through the house with the particular careful stillness of a kid trying to hold something too big for him without dropping it in front of anyone. We got him a child psychologist, someone independent, appointed partly through the custody proceedings and partly because I didn't trust my own judgment enough in the middle of my own unraveling to know what he needed without help. Dr. Marsh was patient in the way good ones are, gave him room to be angry, gave him room to grieve two mothers at once, the one who raised him and the one who'd been kept from him, without asking him to choose between them faster than he was ready to. There were nights that year I found him sitting on the porch alone, and I'd sit next to him without saying anything, because I'd learned by then that he didn't always need words from me, just the fact of me being there steady, the way I'd tried to be steady for him since he was 6 weeks old. Did you know, he asked me once, months in, his voice small in the dark. Before the hospital, did you know and just not tell me? No, I said. I promise you, I found out the same way everything else fell apart. All at once, and too late to have done anything differently. Are you still my dad? I remember that question landing somewhere just beneath my ribs, sharper than almost anything else in the whole ordeal. I have been since the day you were 6 weeks old, I said. Nothing anyone did or didn't tell either of us changes that. That's not a decision that belongs to your grandmother or your mom or even to biology. It belongs to us. He cried then, finally, the way I think he'd needed to for weeks, and I held him on that porch the way I had 100 times before, except this time we both understood, in a way neither of us had before, exactly what we were choosing to hold onto. The court allowed Renee supervised visitation, working slowly at Caleb's pace, toward something neither forced nor forbidden. I stayed his legal guardian, uncontested, through every hearing, and somewhere in that slow, careful process, Caleb and Renee found something that wasn't quite mother and son but wasn't nothing either. An ant-shaped relationship, maybe, built honestly instead of staged, which felt in its own way like the only piece of this whole story that ended up more honest than it started. I rewrote my estate plan that year, with lawyers who had no connection to anyone in Alina's family. The company went into a trust, not automatically inherited, not a prize waiting for whoever managed to stay closest to me the longest, but something governed by an independent board, something a person would eventually have to earn a place inside rather than simply be handed because of whose name they carried or whose blood. Caleb graduated high school 6 years later. I sat in a folding chair in a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and nervous energy, watching him cross a stage in a cap too big for his head, and I thought, not for the first time, about how strange it was that the truest family I'd ever built came from a lie somebody else had told. Afterward, in the parking lot, surrounded by other families taking photos, he found me in the crowd and introduced me to a cluster of his friends' parents, people I hadn't met before, with the easy pride of a kid who'd stopped needing to explain anything about his family a long time ago. "This is my dad," he said. Then, catching himself, correcting towards something more precise, more earned, "This is the man who chose me, even when everyone else was choosing money." I didn't say anything back right away. I don't think I could have, not without my voice giving out on me in front of a parking lot full of strangers. I just put my hand on his shoulder, the way my own father used to, and let it say what I couldn't. Standing there, watching him laugh with his friends under the gymnasium's floodlights, I thought about my parents, gone so young, and the company they'd left me that I'd never asked for. I thought about 12 empty years I'd once believed were fate's mistake. I thought about a marriage built on a lie, and a family built somehow on the wreckage of it anyway. My parents left me a company. Life taught me something worth infinitely more. Never let anyone mistake your kindness for ownership.